Hi, Professor Knack. Uh, uh, Let me do the ID. Almost forgot. I hope that comes through clear enough. I'm Scott Reif. Pleasure to meet you. I initially thought to do uh, moderation management as a topic, but really couldn't find some of the information I was hoping to as far as substance uh, or as in quality, you would say, I could say. So in hindsight, I thought, oh, well, obviously mindfulness practices have been a major part of my recovery and life in the past 10 years or so. So I thought it was just kind of a natural approach, and I got to say, I learned quite a bit of new information that I didn't know, and I consider myself somewhat informed. And it was an excellent learning experience, if not anxiety-inducing. Just yeah, but I hope I didn't exceed my remit, as they say, and go too deep. But I really had a passion for the subject, and I really enjoyed doing some of the research. And I actually put aside a bunch of papers and sources for myself to read about techniques I wasn't familiar with and just topics of interest because, yeah, in the process of looking for materials to cite, I really found a treasure trove of new information. So with that said, I'll get started. This is my mindfulness-based interventions and substance abuse deck. We're going to go over a description of what mindfulness-based interventions are, what their history is. I may use the abbreviation MBI semi-regularly just for brevity's sake, but I'll get into what exactly that encompasses in a moment. But we'll talk about mechanisms of action, how they work, their effectiveness in regards to co-occurring disorders, substance abuse, and behavioral addiction. Questions regarding challenges facing the practice and what its future might look like. And then, of course, just the reference section and the papers I pulled from in order to complete this project. So I'm actually going to put on my reading glasses here. It'll be easier. I made an author's note regarding the what exactly mindfulness-based interventions is going to encompass. There are so many small and combined techniques that I think it would get very confusing if I, jump around from body scanning and meditation and savoring and things like that, and instead focus primarily on just using the term mindfulness-based interventions to encompass that multiplicity of techniques and approaches. And of course, where it's relevant, though, I will make the distinction. What is mindfulness? The Western approach is kind of rooted in the framework of the mind-body dichotomy, where in open monitoring, we're focusing on the internal stimuli, our thoughts, feelings, emotions, our reactions, and the quality of those thoughts. So there's that internal focus, and then there's the somewhat external focus where you're paying attention not only to your environment and how it impacts the tactile and feelings in the body, you're also being cognizant of the feelings in the body. Say, for instance, like with body scanning, you're very in tune to what's happening and what feelings reside where in the body. So those are the two locus that most mindfulness-based practices are going to focus on. Though if we look at Eastern interpretations, where the practice originated mostly, you'll see that they don't just separate it into the two fragments. It's a little more granular, and there's the relationship of the self to the body, the feelings for good or bad, thought processes, and how we learn not to judge ourselves based on the thoughts that flitter through our mind. And then, of course, what I think is one of the more interesting components that doesn't get talked about enough is the art of like non-doing and letting go, living without attachment, and tangentially also like finding beauty in the world and your relation to it. I think those are tenets or approaches. Those are elements of the foundational approach to mindfulness that I find very enriching, and I think should get more promotion for the people that are maybe a little more atheistic or agnostic and need to develop at least a connection with something spiritual or higher power without defining it. I think that's a very helpful technique. Before I get off on a tangent here, the three fundamental tenets of mindfulness, which we'll see revisited over and over again: intention, attention, and attitude. We see that represented too in 12-step programs. Granted, they get more roundabout in cultivating that during your recovery, but there are things that I think anyone, whether they're within the throes of substance use or just going about their daily lives, it's tenets to remember as part of the approach. It's fundamental to mindfulness. The history of MBIs. My apologies. The origins of mindfulness go back thousands of years to Buddhist practices. Granted, we do in the West tend to take, since we're not rooted in any particular religious approach with mindfulness, we do tend to take from all kinds of different cultures, and because there's some fundamental tenets like we talked about with the attention, intention, and attitude that are present in outcomes with all around the world. And America being America, it's able to adopt piecemeal and create kind of a boutique approach to the mindfulness practices. I believe the original, like the first identified mindfulness-based meditation and yoga and a whole slew of spiritual and focus on the nature of suffering in life. That goes back to Vispana. I'm certainly butchering it, and they that was the practice that most people assume that a lot of what we just understand to be mindfulness originated from, and it's translated as see things as they are. So I think again it kind of cuts to the quick and represents a lot of what mindfulness is all about. That ability to stand back and look at the world in a more objective way, even though we're hopelessly locked in our subjective viewpoints. But I'll get more into that. It really developed in the West in the later decades of the 20th century, mainly to the credit of Dr. John Kabat-Zinn at the University of Massachusetts. He created the mindfulness-based stress reduction, and in the 70s and 80s developed what most people in the West consider to be mindfulness practices, generally using yoga and meditation in particular. And he developed it, I believe, for patients in hospitals experiencing pain and depression and anxiety, and was able to show some benefits, and slowly it caught caught on with practitioners, and then he published, let's see, this book, Full Catastrophe Living, and as you can see, it's mighty thick. And this was, I guess, the mindfulness Bible for practitioners for a long time, until the turn of the 20th first century, and science and researchers and practitioners had really glommed onto the benefits in mindfulness practices, and they were able to um, learn and utilize his techniques in different ways. And there's a ton of research now and funding going towards determining, their efficacy and what works for what ailment, excuse me. In contrast to addiction, what is mindfulness? If we think of addiction as mindless, just we're completely at the whims of uh, our addiction, where our life is dictated by a drug, our feelings, our everything is locked within a prison of sorts, and in the relationship between the addict and their substance of choice or behavior, and all the negative consequences that come from that. There's just not a lot of autonomy and self-awareness there. Just as course, it's very difficult to get people out of those destructive cycles. Um, Mindfulness, I think, is a very effective way to open the door on change. It represents essentially what is opposite of being in the throes of addiction. You're able to, love yourself and think of yourself as more than just your past and and the thoughts in your mind, and learn to I don't know, hone in on who you are. And again, that you do that through observing your thoughts, and learning to view yourself without judgment. Emotional regulation, of course, is a major component. Um, the reflection on long-term impacts is very effective in relapse prevention. Learning to identify beauty and in the world around us is, I think, essential not only for handling depression, but also for inspiration to help addicts, to guide them out of the dark and into the light, um, via, what is beautiful in the world and in themselves and in others. And then, of course, relieving physical strain, anxiety, and depression is a huge part of not uh, living the life of an addict for a lot of people. What are some mindfulness practices? And we keep talking about mindfulness, mindfulness, mindfulness. What does it actually look like? Um, Meditation and yoga, I think, are come to mind for everybody. They're uh, well well known around the U.S. and in the West. They've been studied. A lot of the evidence I'll be citing later on relates to meditation in particular, and uh, there is literally, I could probably extend this list by a dozen or so if I wanted to discuss a lot of the niche techniques and approaches people have developed. But for the time being, I wanted to touch on some of the fundamental ones that everyone can understand. Breath work, obviously, is a component not only unto itself, but almost to all of these. It's the building block a lot of practice is built on. Body scanning is, again, referencing what in your body doesn't feel right, or where you have stress and tension, where it resides. I carry all my stuff in the shoulders. So you generally go from the top of your head down to the soles of your feet and just be aware of how your body feels. Urge surfing we discussed in the readings. That involves learning to manage your cravings and ride them out. You want to be able to not give cravings control of your thought processes, recognize it's there, and then just, go about what you need to be doing. And you'll find that you can just, the craving dissipates. It doesn't last forever. Mind body bridging is a little more intense version of, I guess, a combination of body scanning and urge surfing to some degree. You're looking at what in the environment or in your mind causes stress and tension and um, leads to ailments and cravings. What in your body, how does it respond to certain things, and where does that those negative thoughts, where do they manifest in your body and your mind once they become somewhat obsessive in thought? How does it impact yourself? Kind of just learning to be aware of what your stressors are, essentially. Savoring is kind of the opposite of that. You're trying to change attentional bias towards positive stimuli, things that, again, beauty in the world, things that make you feel content, people you love. You want to, kind of similar to like a gratitude list, you'd want to understand the things that you genuinely treasure and learn to bask in some of that reward processing to orient yourself to more positive cues and move away from drug cues. So that said, there are a wide number of therapeutic approaches to mindfulness. Pardon me. I know I probably wasn't supposed to dip into these, but I think they illustrate the wide variety and combination of other interventions that your people are able to put together and how they might apply to different components of recovery, essentially. Mindfulness oriented recovery enhancement focuses again on the positive psychology, things like savoring and CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, blending that together with yoga and self attunement. That you get more benefits mixing a large number of techniques and integrating them together. Mindfulness-based cognitive therapy is an obvious one. Cognitive therapy's popularity as a treatment option, and a ton of research based on effectiveness of the therapy. It was just a matter of time before they decided to integrate mindfulness-based practices into that therapy. And you see in the research a lot of focus on that and a lot of data on how it is effective, and more so than some standard treatments. Acceptance and commitment therapy. We'll talk about this one again a little later. It helps generate behavioral change and psychological plasticity, meaning it kind of reorients your perceptions and where you put your focus throughout the day, and that can lead to changes in how you behave. Dialectic behavior therapy. That's, I think, going to be pretty important in the future, given the struggles younger folks have with social anxiety. I think emotional overload is something that a lot of young people would like to learn how to address and not let it dominate their life so much. the ontological addiction theory, that was something of particular interest to me. Again, we haven't talked a ton about spirituality, and that's a fundamental component of the Eastern approach to mindfulness. We've secularized it. This is an attempt to take it back to its roots, per se, and uh, help people find that connection with the wider universe. Um, it, as someone who was an agnostic as a young man, I found spirituality to be a major benefit in my recovery. And I don't subscribe to any organized religion, but any means by which a person who is detached from the grandeur of the universe, I would say, it is a good thing. That I think there's on ramps to that awareness for more secular clients. Mindfulness based stress reduction, that's an oldie but a goodie. It's John Kabat-Zinn's original program for University of Massachusetts. The yoga and meditation, again, the fundamental components of many mindfulness practices, and how he created that for hospital patients to cope with both physical ailments and mental, and how its application in a lot of components of psychological psychotherapy. You see its applications in the field now more so, and it was born from this particular seed. How are mindfulness-based interventions practiced? As we talked before, and I think is summarized by Brantner, MBIs are just a group of related practices derived from different contemplative cultural resources. Techniques and models can be employed, like I said, in tandem or together in bundles or just separately with other MBIs or other interventions. It's your ability to mix and match based on desired outcomes is quite significant. Some MBIs, I guess, as I said, are more effective in treating certain substances and behavioral addictions, and same applies with its effectiveness for certain mental ailments, such as depression and anxiety and obsessive thinking, things like that. And then, of course, MBIs can be used as preventative care to help arrest the emergence of mental health concerns. It's not just something addicts need. It's something anybody can use and find helpful, especially if they're going through a difficult phase in their life and they need the extra support of, a friendly figure in their life and something they can do to maybe arrest or cope with emotional overload and physical stress. How are mindfulness-based interventions practiced? MBIs are often practiced in clinical settings as components of every stage of the treatment process that's available, whether it's PHP intensive care or outpatient or just general weekly therapy appointment for troubled folks. It's applicable along the whole chain there, and of course, it's also available within the community. There's all kinds of meditation groups usually one can find if they live in a semi-urban area, and it's available pretty much anywhere. It's one of the benefits of it. MBIs can be used as preventative care for mental health issues. We covered that. And mindfulness can be practiced all alone or in groups. Again, the versatility of MBIs is what I think makes them effective in so many different scenarios. And the ability to do it by yourself or with a group I think has different impacts, and both are valuable. How exactly do MBIs work? They create the feeling of metacognitive awareness, and what that is essentially what the term is, thinking about thinking, learning to be aware of the thoughts in your mind, how they present themselves, when they present themselves, and what's the emotional root behind those thoughts and feelings. And I think most people don't realize how much they can do to bring control to that and not just be defined by whatever thoughts coming into their mind. Decentering is learning to view the world through other viewpoints. It's an essential way, I think, for people to detach themselves from all the assumptions they make. And a lot of those assumptions often lead to drug use. And the ability to detach yourself from that and see things from a multiplicity of viewpoints, you start to understand that the connection between your action and your thoughts is something you can have control over, and you don't have to just work off the biases and assumptions that your mind throws at you, and you have some control over that. It's very similar to reorienting attentional bias. How mindfulness impacts the reward processing points of your brain is very important, and it allows people to recognize that the rewards they get from drug use or behavioral issues is fleeting, and if you get the opportunity to experience actual contentment and rewards from achievement and meeting challenges and building relationships, you start to recognize that those are the actual rewards you need to be focusing on. And mindfulness tends to be very good at guiding people in that direction. Reducing the impacts of stress and negative emotions on the body. Anyone who's been through the withdrawal process knows how achy and uncomfortable that is. And while I've never found mindfulness to alleviate all that entirely, it does, in my opinion, make it much easier to manage. And there's a lot of evidence that I've come across that actually validates those feelings. So I'm happy to see I wasn't deluding myself entirely there. One moment. Pardon me. Manage cravings and increase awareness, impulsivity cues. Again, revisiting that term of the art of non-doing, learning that we don't always have to respond to the decisions or thoughts in our minds or feelings or the demands of the world around us. We're able to step back from that, I think, and to better assess what it is we commit ourselves to doing, what actions we're taking. And certainly with addicts, and that impulsivity, that cue that kicks on the urge and the craving, it just leads you by the nose. And I think this is an excellent way for reducing that impact. Treating addiction, how are MBIs effective in that regard, or not effective per se, but what are the mechanisms technically by which they act. Short-term and long-term approaches are beneficial. Say a student comes in to a counselor or whatnot, is deeply or is just kind of hyperventilating a bit, or is really agitated, and the counselor walks them through a breathing exercise and some body scanning maybe, and that singular instance might help the person, but it's not going to have a serious long-term impact unless there's some amazing amount of inspiration in the practitioner or the patient. So long-term interventions are certainly much more helpful and show more lasting results than just singular interventions. MBIs can certainly disrupt your value structure in a way that I think brings you closer to reality and how other people kind of relate to the world. I know in my recovery, this was a massive wake up call for me when I became despondent almost, because if I was so wrong about so many things, what else was I wrong about? And fortunately, I had met someone who, in that state of mind, was able to give me some of the tools to figure that out for myself, who I was, what actually might be important in life, and it gave me a sense of self again. So very important, I think, when reshaping, helping an addict find their own way to reshaping themselves. And mindfulness can be effective in addressing addictions across the spectrum of use, states of change. It might not be as effective if a person is highly resistant or agitated, but there isn't, I think, a moment where you can't utilize some technique from the mindfulness spectrum. Again, whether it's breathing or just relaxing the body or helping someone who's hurt, deal with the pain. There's, yeah, I think it's applicable in so many cases and at times of crisis in a lot of cases. Yeah, sorry, rambling on that one. I'm so tired. Mindfulness can help addicts cope with aches and pains associated with post-acute withdrawal. I know for my sake, not having someone walk me through some yoga and meditation and learning to separate myself a bit from pain and to, work my body in a way that alleviated aches and tension was immensely helpful. I was always in danger of relapse during those post-acute withdrawal periods, just from physical discomfort, and learning techniques to alleviate that. And for people who are suffering from other physical ailments, I think is a wonderful thing. Easier said than done, of course, but it is possible. Now we get to the evidence portion of the deck. I reviewed a number of studies and tried to find some of the best data points from them. I obviously do not have any background in neurobiology or some of the scientific approaches taken in some of these studies, but there were some clear indications as to what kind of positive improvements people experienced regarding mindfulness-based interventions, often meditation. So, with that said, they found that smokers participating in a mindfulness-based intervention had a much higher abstinence rate when compared to treatment as usual populations. And what we'll see MBIs being very good at alleviating is the cravings there was a significant reduction in those with smokers participating in the MBI compared to standard interventions. I also remember from this study was a point that I think is also relevant, that where mindfulness-based interventions are sometimes good for certain substances, they also work best at certain points, I think, along an addict's journey towards recovery. And the smokers in the MBI intervention group showed that if they did relapse, those with MBIs relapsed less in quantity and in duration, recovered, re-entered recovery. So I think, again, that heightened awareness and attunement to long-term consequences and closer understanding of reality at life as it is helps people right themselves a bit more when they fall. And scientists began to explore the neurological impacts of MBIs, and have discovered numerous changes in the brain, often with relation to the reward processing portion of the mind, ultimately affecting cravings and obsessive thinking are all elements that reward processing, if it's more positive, that the addict is less likely to experience, I think. So, with other fMRI data being reviewed, researchers found that within areas of the brain associated with cravings, motivation, obsessive thinking, substance abuse showed, improved activity and connectivity occurred following mindfulness interventions. I believe it was meditation that this particular data point is referring to. And when it discusses activity and connectivity, what they're talking about there is the heightened flow of neurons in that portion of the brain and the creation of new connections, which I, again, not a neurobiologist, but I assume is a somewhat physical representation of neuroplasticity, where the brain is creating and moving healthier chemistry, and the clients can benefit from that. Pardon me again. With mindfulness-based relapse prevention, participants experience considerable reduction in depression and cravings. Again, the reference to cravings being something that mindfulness is very effective in addressing. Depression is also very important, obviously. The fact that it was only 2 months, though, it will lead to a point towards the end, and at least, though, they were able, if not to do the official follow-up, to stay in touch with some of the participants, and it showed that they were most likely, via self-reporting, would have been following. Most of them would have been following through at the 4-month follow-up. Opioid users are also a cohort that really seem to benefit from mindfulness-based practices in general. That them and alcoholics, I think, show people who have to deal with long-term withdrawal and symptoms thereafter, I think, really benefit from the mental changes one can make in their thought processes to manage a lot of those ailments. So in a comparison with standard psychotherapy, the mindfulness practice patients had a double reduction in opioid misuse compared to the standard group. I thought that was a pretty notable statistic, and I I'm very pleased that they're able to help more people in that case. And I think, again, it's indicative of how opioid misuse comes up often in the data as something MBIs are effective in dealing with. The cerebellum plays a foundational role in the brain, the circuitry associated with addiction, i.e., reward processing, motivation, and cognitive control. And fMRI exams of these SUD patients participating in mindfulness-based interventions showed actual change in the cerebellum's function following meditation. I do not recall how much meditation was involved, what the measures were. Again, that's also a topic I'll touch on at the end. But meditative practice actually evidenced real change, positive at that, in the cerebellum over time. So I feel very validated in my long-term practice and feeling like I noticed some changes in the way my mind works, and where my focus ends up lying. And I know repetition and is always good to learn new behaviors, but to think I might have been able to heal myself physiologically a bit is just very validating feeling. So very rewarding. Using combination of mindfulness and savoring, again, focusing on opioid patients, they were able to reduce aches and chronic pains, and learn to turn that attentional bias away from narcotic cues. Again, all things that generally trip up the average or stereotypical opioid addict, a week, 2 weeks out, and in their abstinence, and these are the techniques I think that be able to help them the most. And if I want to be the counselor, I hope to be. Those are techniques I hope to learn. After analyzing multiple studies on mindfulness-based interventions, researchers have shown, when compared to alternative therapies and control interventions, patients participating in the MBIs derived higher benefits in the reduction of their substance use disorder symptoms. And again, lower stress, lower depression, and fewer negative consequences of substance use were all shown. So again, I was very pleased that mindfulness-based interventions can have some impact on those who are suffering. And like many of the actual practices from thousands of years ago, the 8-week or long-term monthly practice is how people learn, whether it's back in time or right now. There are a long-term practice of mindfulness has the most benefits, and as it states in the last point, alcohol and substance abuse patients, with opioid patients in particular, experience the most benefits from those longer-term programs. Though it does help other cohorts like mothers with substance use disorder, and then the new non-suicidal self-injury patients. Again, shows how sometimes mindfulness-based practices can be effective at a more granular level. As far as behavioral addictions are concerned, there is a lot of success they've noticed in dealing with the affective and cognitive processes in behavioral addicts. I was kind of shocked to see the fact that um, in a good way, that acceptance commitment therapy has been showing the best results relative to other therapies in treating porn addiction. Um, Again, I think it's great that research is being able to hone in on particular practices that affect particular issues, and the fact that they've been able to at least confirm that ACT is good for porn addiction um, is, I think, a great thing that'll help a lot of people find relief. And we have the research on MBIs and SUDs. They were focusing obviously on substances, but they decided to expand their approach to include gambling addiction, and tested it and found that the mood states of gamblers could be altered to more positive states of mind, and they were able to regulate their emotions better following mindfulness practices. So again, something effective for gambling that seems to be a good resource in conjunction with other therapies for people suffering from that particular affliction. And it also found, in regard to eating disorders, that mindfulness practices not only reduce stress and responses to social cues that create anxiety in some patients suffering from eating disorders, but for bulimics who experience hypertension due to the stresses on their system, uh, mindfulness-based practices have been shown to lessen those impacts. And for overeaters who are experiencing the diabetes, there's an effective way to alleviate some of the symptoms that come along with diabetes. So again, I hope they do more work on these particular approaches for each of these ailments, and hopefully are able to really create treatment options that are very effective for patients. And co-occurring disorders, pardon me again. In review of multiple studies on meditation, it was found to be effective in relieving anxiety and depression, which is one of the fundamental components and purposes of mindfulness practice, compared to those treated with cognitive behavioral therapy. Those who practiced MBI experienced more relief from physiological and some of the psychological impacts of stress and anxiety. So while it might not have served to alleviate all mental health issues, it was very good in helping the client find a little bit of calm and serenity and ability to relieve themselves of some of the stress that might make them act out. Neurological research has shown that the brain areas associated with stress are downregulated following mindfulness practices, meaning the flow of something like cortisol, I think it just causes stress, is reduced. The flow of neurons is arrested a bit, and that can impact the calmness and comfort of a patient. And mindfulness practices have been shown, as in surprise to me, a number of more severe physical and mental ailments, or mental ailments mostly. The dissociation and rumination, I think, are great, that it alleviates that, and alexithymia and the difficulty in emotional regulation. Most emotional dysregulation was a major component of where my cravings and and hurt came from, and learning to regulate those and to learn how to experience more positive stimuli was extremely important for me. And then of course there's experiential avoidance, isolation, and then psychotic delusions, which was new information to me. I wasn't aware that uh, mindfulness could tackle something of that severity. Um, so I was very impressed to see a lot of these as something that mindfulness-based practices can alleviate. So I think, yep, questions. Um, Moving forward, there, like I said before, the combination of techniques and mindfulness practices is extremely varied, and that the research hasn't picked a standardized definition of what mindfulness practice is. Everything can be mindfulness based, which is the foundation, the building block, and then it's adopted or adapted or combined with something to affect a particular outcome. And this makes research on it very erratic. Um, Questions also remain regarding like how much mindfulness do you need in order to feel better? How much do you need to be healed? Is there a prescription, a recommendation that fits everybody? Is 8 weeks enough? Do people have to, alternate? Are there different approaches? There are different techniques uh, that are have a higher concentration of mindfulness versus others. Um, it's a very elusive, I think, notion, and makes, again, finding a measure for research difficult. And by extension, how much training does a person need to be effective as a mindfulness, uh, someone who can lead intervention, or help a group? I can imagine that some people who aren't very good at it but know how to utilize the technique might lead a person into a very traumatic mental state, or very angry. There's a lot of emotions that can bubble up. I can imagine it going bad in a lot of different ways. Um, so how do you qualify what's a good practitioner and what's not? Again, it leaves a significant question, and going into that, uh, one of the difficulties in doing long-term studies is just being able to do long-term studies. Um, it takes a lot of planning and structure and funding, and a stable population of participants. So there's a lot of hurdles to doing long-term quality study. Not enough research has been done on outcomes for young people and adolescents. They're starting to conduct research on how mindfulness practices can benefit young people, but I think for the time being, there's a paucity of good research on that particular cohort. And then again, the problem with defining mindfulness-based practices or mindfulness-based intervention um, comes with how do you measure it? What are the variables that everyone can agree on that can be comparators for a scientific study? Um, it's I think I was very pleased to see the number of researchers approaching mindfulness practices, uh, but yeah, some clarity. I did notice when reading a lot of these papers that um, you know the they were focused on a lot of different things. Um, so a more cohesive approach is still required. And these are the papers I utilized. Throughout the deck, I had numbered uh, in conjunction with these numbers the citations for anything I used in the deck that I adapted from the studies here. Um, the savoring treatment or savoring practice was something new to me. I did enjoy that one. Interest in smoking, I certainly relate to from back in the day. The ontological addiction theory, that appealed to the philosophy major in me, and um, I definitely relate to the desire to elevate a spiritual component. I did not find a lot of research that discussed spirituality or any attempt to measure it. Um, so that paper was interesting for me. Mindfulness oriented recovery enhancement. Um, that just was a great resource for the type of how mindfulness is applied in a clinical setting. I know that was beyond our remit. Um, I think I just kept going, and in my rush to get everything done, I might have included some stuff that was unnecessary. So my apologies there. Um, just some commentary on mindfulness that I thought would be good to get diversity of opinions um, on the state of the field regarding mindfulness. Um, the pornography addiction piece was pretty amazing to read. How attunement, attentment, or excuse me, acceptance and commitment can really work to change a person's value system a bit and their perception of the world. Um, the mindfulness-based interventions, brain function. I was amazed to see